So, how would you define yourself as a leader?
It's a work in process, but I'm kind of just generally myself. So I'm authentic. I believe I'm empathetic. I'm transparent, but I'm also pretty curious. So I'm always trying to learn things from others. I learn better from watching and interacting than with some kind of reading and analysis as well. But mostly it's again, I'm a curious person who wants to continue to get better and self-improve. And so I look at those around me. I test various different things, and then if it feels like it works and it's authentically me, then I'll kind of keep it in my tool bag and then continue to perfect it over time. So, and then I mostly try to take as much feedback as I can from those that I'm leading, because that's where you get the best feedback from those around you and working under your leadership.
Now, in terms of your leadership journey, do you feel you had it planned out, or some people have written plans and goals, or did you feel like you evolved as you went?
It was definitely an evolution. I knew generally at a relatively young age that I wanted to be in business. I had some natural leadership capabilities and skills. I was a tennis player early on and an athlete at a pretty high level. So I learned how to work within teams, but also the value of hard work and competitiveness. And so as I went through university, I generally had an idea that I wanted to be a leader and focus in business, but I didn't know exactly what that meant. So at one point I wanted to be a stockbroker. At one point I wanted to live in New York City. At one point I wanted to be multiple things, but in general I had a high level vision, and then was mostly open to opportunities as time evolved, and then would kind of navigate that journey all along, kind of being open to the universe and what it was throwing at me, and then reacting as opposed to having a set plan the entire time, and that served me pretty well. I never would have imagined I would have wound up at a place like Google. I never would have wound up north in Canada. But all of those have been great opportunities for me, but I kind of let it happen, and kind of made my own luck.
Now, what do you feel is your greatest attribute or strength as a leader?
I'm a really good listener, and I don't have much of an ego. At least I don't think I do. So as I get feedback and as I listen and I kind of look around me, again, like I said before, that builds my leadership style. So I'm constantly learning. It's a constant work in process. I'm authentically me. So I can't fake it. I learned that a long time ago. It's much better to just be yourself and continue to try to improve yourself versus being someone else. And that's kind of worked for me over time. So I think I generally say that's how I've approached it.
Now, if you could go back 10 years, was there a certain attribute or style that you had as a leader that you feel you've had to change in today's time?
No, I haven't had to change. I was pretty fortunate. So 10 years ago, I was right in the middle of a career at Google, and at the time, Google was a bit of an outlier. It was all digital. It was a younger generation company. It was kind of born in on the internet and in mobile. So now, 10 years later, as I'm trying to digitally transform another company, all of that kind of comes naturally to me because I grew up at a place like Google, and many of the leadership tenets and lessons I learned as a leader, many of them I picked up at Google. So the concept of transparency and focusing on the user and the product experience, and technology driving the business as opposed to sales or something, really focusing on the product and what you can deliver to the viewer or the user or the consumer. That all became pretty natural. And so I've applied many of those things over the last 10 years. So if anything, it was I was a little bit before my time working there at Google, and those are lessons I've picked up that I've now been able to leverage at a slightly more traditional company. But otherwise, my approach has been the same for probably the past 15, 20 years, where I'm, from a leadership perspective, I mostly just try to engage with those around me, learn, be authentic to myself, and over communicate.
Now, was there ever a challenge, an obstacle, or an event that you feel has shaped how you have become as a leader?
I had a pretty good track record in various different companies, and then when I went to Google, because Google was just flying at the time, everything we touched was kind of gold. So I really didn't have any missteps in my career.
Mhm.
And probably 10 years ago or so, I had a pretty tough year at Google. The business that I was running had a down year. I was getting some feedback that I wasn't pushing hard enough, or I wasn't open to change. I wasn't evolving my team, and it was the first time I had some level of a loss from a business perspective. And so it took me a little bit longer to react and respond to that. And that's what I learned the most. So I got through it, but it took me a lot longer because I hadn't really seen it before. But the reason I wasn't getting some of the larger roles at Google at the time, the feedback I got after that was, well, you hadn't really had a speed bump yet. And we wanted to see how you dealt with that blow and how you dealt with that speed bump. And eventually you got through it, but you're going to have many of these in your career, and especially as the ecosystem gets more uncertain. And so I didn't get the big opportunity that I got in Canada to run Google Canada until I got through that speed bump in my career. So it formed a lot of my character. It formed a lot of my ability to very quickly run to a solution and try to address a problem much faster than I had done before. And I now have a bit more muscle memory on how to deal with those things. So that was a pretty big moment. And I got through it. And so, as new things come up, like pandemic or anything, other kind of crazy things, I feel like I could react pretty quickly because of a couple of those previous losses I got through.
Now, in terms of motivating your teams, do you find that that is changing as you're going through the pandemic environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the communication style, frequency, methods, those things have changed a bit. The core driver of developing a vision, listening to your team, understanding their concerns, addressing those concerns, identifying kind of a go take the mountain type of statement. Those things are still very valid,
Mm-hmm.
but the environment is so different. Everyone is on edge. You're doing everything over a computer. There's lots of anxiety inside the organization, inside households. And so, if anything, I've learned to almost slow down a little bit and not push too hard, allow folks the space to react to this crazy world we're all living in. We had to quickly retool the business a bit and respond to the pandemic. But as the business is beginning to recover, I find myself trying to slow down a bit and trying not to push folks too hard because they've been dealing with a lot, both personally and professionally. So that's kind of one thing that I've adjusted a bit, is just the speed and the push versus some of the other things that are a little, that are always going to be there.
Now, what motivates you the most as a leader?
I want to win. So I'm a super competitive person. So, once we set some goals, or when it's clear what the goalposts are, I'm going to do everything I can to execute and win. I love working with a team, and I love seeing a team come together. So that's extremely motivational. I've worked with some great teams. I've worked with some not so great teams. I've worked with teams that have had to come together and eventually get to a flow where everyone is supporting one another. And once you are in that flow and you're working alongside folks that you respect and that you love and that you're kind of attacking a mission together, there's nothing better. So I'm always striving to kind of get to that moment. So that's extremely motivating. So I think it's a combination of things. It's, I've got a will to win, but I also love teamwork and motivating a team, having each other's back and having a feeling that you can almost get through anything together. That's what's been pretty inspiring about working through the virus and the pandemic, the economic pandemic, the economic issues, is everyone's kind of in it together. And the only way we're going to get through it is if we rely on each other. So in that way, it's been pretty motivating to get through it. It's hard, but these moments are pretty cool to operate within a close team.
Now, what would you say is your proudest moment as a leader?
Well, hopefully I haven't had it yet. And there's great moments to come. I've had a really cool career. So I've worked with a bunch of great teams, worked at some cool companies. I had a great career at Google, which at the time, and still is, probably, one of the best business stories of all time. I worked really hard there, got promoted to a VP level and the president level in Canada. And that was a pretty big milestone for me. And I felt like I accomplished a lot. But I'm mostly proud of the fact I've still got lots of relationships from all the previous companies I've worked with, still mentor a lot of folks that were on my teams back then. And that's the part that's most gratifying, is just watching folks that you've worked alongside or that you've led lead themselves and evolve in their career. And so still maintaining those relationships and watching from afar while I'm also trying to build those same leaders inside my current company. That's what gives me the most gratification.
What advice would you give to the next generation of leaders?
There's no substitute for hard work. So almost at whatever you do. So at the time that I was building my career, I didn't know ultimately what I was going to become, but the one thing that you can't substitute is just working hard and doing your best. So that's something I would recommend to anyone. There's no shortcuts. And even though you don't recognize where the hard work is going to lead at the time, you'll 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, you'll recognize something you did in the past that you worked so hard to achieve has allowed you to get to some place that you maybe never thought you were going to be able to get to. So I think hard work. And then, like I said earlier, have a high level plan, perhaps. That always worked for me. I had a general sense of where I wanted to go. But then as opportunities arrived and I looked at them, if it felt right and I had the right gut instinct and I was moving somewhere to learn more or gain more skills, and I was constantly curious, those things tended to pay off. So sometimes it was uncomfortable, but that openness to change, to evolution, the curiosity, if you put in the work and you're kind of open to opportunities, you make your own luck. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And so if you put in the work and then you're open to new opportunities, lots of cool things can happen.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a great reminder for many that are pushing hard.
That's right.
In terms of the role of a leader, when it comes to inclusion and diversity, when it comes to corporate social responsibility, what are your thoughts around what the role of a leader should be or needs to be?
Well, all of this starts from the top. So if an organization doesn't feel like there's a core value set of inclusion, of equity inside an organization, then they're not going to buy in. So it all has to stem from the top, whether that's the head leader, the CEO, or the senior management team, or all of the above. The organization needs to feel like this is a priority. And ultimately, any person, whether you're on a team, whether you're in a family, whether you're in a company, needs to feel like they can bring their entire self to work or to home every day. And if you can't be yourself, and you're not working in an organization that allows you to be yourself, the organization's not going to get the best out of you. You're not going to have a very good experience, and it's just not going to work. And so, but that's very difficult, and the leader has to help create the venue where there's enough psychological safety inside the entire organization that anyone, given their background or their beliefs, can work inside an organization and feel like they can be themselves. That's the ultimate, and ultimately it's up to the leader to ensure that that venue is in place. And it's not easy, especially not easy as you're trying to evolve a culture, or your organization gets large, or it's across multiple offices, across multiple countries. It can be done, and it should be done, but it takes a lot of work, and it generally has to start from the top.
Now, in terms of, you hear a lot of everything needs to be digitized and everything needs to be automated and moved online. But I think with the pandemic, there's a lot of discussion around underlying business models need to be relooked at. I know you have a lot of experience in this area. What are your thoughts and recommendations for leaders on how they should be looking at this differently?
Yeah, I mean, you only automate a process that that actually works. So generally automation, you find a repeatable process that works, it generates an outcome. And if that can be automated, digitized, great. If it cannot, that's fine as well. But you don't go and just automate everything. You identify what makes the most sense, what you can automate that would be more efficient, what process doesn't work now that might in the future, or that did in the past but it doesn't now. So you have to kind of evaluate the underlying business. The traditional factors of business don't change in a digital environment. Really, it's, do you have a product or a service that the user or the customer wants, or are there other elements like operational excellence or pricing, et cetera, that are a differentiator for you? And if those elements are in place, great, double down, build a business on it. And then you look at all of the processes inside of an organization. And if you now have tools that you never had before, so that you can communicate with all your employees over a screen and folks don't need to be in an office, great. Or if you're selling something and now you don't have to have a brick and mortar, you can do it on a digital store, great. There are tools that exist for that. But I wouldn't digitize just for digitization's sake. But the reality is most businesses now, and many of the underlying infrastructure and processes are like software companies. There's just so much software inside an organization. And so if that's the case, then you probably have to start thinking like a technology company and a software company, and have the processes, the people in place that can allow you to do that. But you still have to get back to first order principles of how you make money, how you keep customers happy, how good is your product, how do you make it better? And then once those are in place, you can figure out the other things that you might need to transform.
Any book that you would recommend to say, Sarah, you need to read this to look at leadership differently or to challenge your perspective?
Oh, I mean, you just have to constantly, I think you have to be a student of leadership if you really want to, at least I have been. I tend to read tons of biographies on leaders. I love sports. I always have, and there's great parallels between sports teams or individuals that are great leaders inside sports teams. Even just watching, strange. I just watched kind of a goofy Netflix or Apple Plus show, Ted Lasso, kind of a comedy, and but there were so many unbelievable leadership lessons in it that you could take away. So if you're on the lookout for how to make yourself a better leader, you just constantly have to take signals from everywhere. So I don't have one book because I'm constantly reading them. One of the latest ones I read was the biography of the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger. That was fantastic. There's a bunch of lessons in there. just started the new Obama biography. There'll be a ton of great lessons in there. So I think you just constantly have to, you've got a tool bag of a bunch of assets that you can employ as a leader, and you constantly have to figure out how you add more tools in that toolbox and then make it your own.
Now, if you have an opportunity based on all your experience to sit down and write a book in which you could, inspire leaders or give your own thoughts or recommendations, is there a specific topic that you would write about?
Someday I do want to write a book. My dad was my coach. He was my tennis coach. He was best man at my wedding. He was just my best friend, and I constantly leveraged him for advice. And because he was so formidable in my early years as I was becoming a tennis player, lessons that he projected upon me for tennis
Mhm.
over time, those were fundamental lessons that I could then apply to business. And oftentimes when I was at Google or previous companies, I would have him join via video conference and give us lessons that he taught me playing tennis that could apply to where we were at the time in business. So
Mhm.
I would probably write a book called Lessons from the Coach, which were, life lessons that I took from him early in life when I was in my teenage years to apply to tennis that I've discovered, I'm almost 50 years old, over my career, that have applied more in life and in business than they did in tennis.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, that would probably be, and it would just be a good, um, and like I mentioned, as I've read and studied leadership from lots of different leaders, a lot of those could be bucketed under many of the lessons I learned from my dad. And so I'm almost writing the book in my head over time. But that would be how I'd think about that one.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sounds good. I like to read that one. um,
Someday.
yeah. My next question is, if there was an opportunity to put you on the cover of Time magazine around your biggest achievement, what would you like it to say?
Oh, I think it would probably be more just around, being a good coach.
Mhm.
Um, to the folks that I work with. So I'm be less concerned about a great business success
Mhm.
or starting a company or running a company. It would be more about the lives that I've impacted, that I've worked with, or that I continue to coach and mentor. That's much more scalable, because if you're having an impact on tens or hundreds or thousands of people that you've worked with over time, then that lives and evolves all around you in a much more scalable way. My dad was a teacher and a coach, so I probably got that from him.
And then my last question, if you were to give a quote that would be the legacy for you as a leader, what would that quote be?
Well, probably have to bring it back to my dad again. My dad got this poster for me when I was a kid. It said, "Big shots are only little shots who keep shooting." And it was kind of a motivational credo or saying that you know outlined many of the things I just described to you about my leadership philosophy. So hard work, not having an ego, always kind of acting like you've been there before, right? So a big shot, it isn't really a big shot. They just put in all the reps and all the hours so that it's natural when they get to that big stage.
Mhm.
Um, and the first time I beat him when I was playing tennis, he gave me a plaque. I think it's somewhere behind me now, that said that. And it's always kind of driven me, because you got to put in the hard work, and then you need to act like you're a little shot, even when maybe reach some level of success, because it really is, you're only as good as your last loss, and you can only continue to drive and uh, be successful if you kind of have that chip on your shoulder of just being a little shot and always working as hard as you possibly can to get to the next level.
Mhm. Okay.